Okay, I've gone a bit arty in the title of this video. I should probably just stick to the chess. I could equally have called the title of this video Knight versus Rook. The Knight is stronger than the Rook. It's really just a continuation of the last video where I went through 3 different positions from actual games where the Knight was stronger than the Rook. This video is going to be 4 different studies where the Knight is stronger than the Rook. The first one is the position on the screen in front of you. It's from 1925. It's white to play and win. It's from this book, hence Jan Timman's 100 endgame studies you must know being below me on the screen. All 4 of the positions that we're going to look at are, they're absolutely brilliant. And something that struck me as I was going through them is that, with this argument of like, oh, well, that's just a study. Yeah, it's very good. I enjoyed it, but is it going to help me with my chess? And, I could come back with a transferable skills argument, etc., etc. Something that struck me was that all of them are very, very similar in that we've got a far advanced passed pawn and a knight that's sort of supporting it nearby. And that's one of the circumstances that Dvoretsky talks about when the knight is stronger than the rook. So the people who came up with these studies have had to use that same fact. And that made me realise that once you sort of get a feel for that, the way that the rook really is tied down to stopping that passed pawn and the way that it then doesn't do other things that we ordinarily sort of, you automatically see the line of a rook and where it goes. And then if it's got to stop a passed pawn, it's just not doing those other jobs. Whilst at the same time, you've got this knight that can hop around, do forks, deliver checks to get to different places and block the rook's route to defending that passed pawn. I think they're all ideas that we will absolutely be able to use in games and not just if you get a rook versus knight endgame. I can't prove it. I can't prove this transferable skills argument. But I'm just going to crack on with it anyway because I just feel like it's good, it's working, and the worst case scenario is I'm just having fun. Some of these positions are brilliant, including this first one. Pause the video. 1925 study, white to play. What would you do? So all 4 of them have actually got reasonably obvious first moves. And this one's got an obvious first move and a pretty obvious second move as well. So we push the b pawn. Black comes back to defend the promotion of that b pawn, and the white knight comes in to c6. So what does black do? Like they're about to lose their rook for that pawn, and then this pawn's going to win white the game. Well, that kind of answers the question, doesn't it? The black king can come to f4 and make sure that white pawn doesn't win white the game. So if white then just sort of goes after hassling that black rook, because there aren't really many squares. There aren't many squares on that back rank. I mean, they're controlled by I'm not sure what's going on with my colour coding here. They're controlled by the pawn. They're controlled by the knight. These are now controlled by the king. I mean, guess black's move here. But, there's a lot of squares being controlled by all of white's forces. And white can just keep hassling that black rook. The problem is that's all they can do. They can just keep hassling. If the king goes back to g7, we'd see rook e8. But white's got another clever idea here, and it is the blocking of the black rook's defense of b8. We want to get a knight to d8. So white can play king e7. And sure enough, if black says, okay, I'll get my rook to the 7th rank, just clear the h7 square, knight d8 blocks, rook h7 check, knight f7, rook can't come back to h8, and white's won. But in this position, h5 wasn't the only way that black could get their rook to the 7th rank. The very simple rook g8. And all you could do there, really, is go back and hassle the black rook. If the block happens, rook g7 check, knight f7, rook back to g8. And this position's actually a draw. White can't stop the black rook losing itself for this b pawn, and then this g pawn's going to get rounded up by the king. So what do we do? Well, it's still the same first 2 moves. b7, rook f8, knight c6. And then after king f4, here's the the pinnacle, the climax of this particular study. An incredible move, really. So, I mean, you sort of wonder what that g-pawn's doing on the board, except for the fact that white needs one extra pawn once the black rook's gone to actually win the game. But check this out. g4. Bosh. I mean, black's got to take that pawn. You know, they're about to lose their rook over here for this pawn. So if they don't take this, if they just sort of do nothing, g5, we're going to play b8 next move, and well, we just don't do anything with this. We just leave our king and pawn there, and the knight's going to come in. It's a very easy win. So black's got no choice but to defend, to take that pawn on g4. And you know, black might be thinking, well, great, you couldn't quite hassle my rook off the 8th rank before, so you've sacked a pawn. Well done. It's even easier for me now. But the trick is that we've dragged that king to a square where black really doesn't want their king. And now we come in for the rook. King g7, rook e8, king f7, rook to h8, king e7. Same again, by the way, if black tries h5. Same block, the rook can't go back to h8. Black's like, yeah, that's fine, I've got that covered. Look, I can come back to g8. So there, if you block, I'll go back and forth on the g8 and the g7 squares. Block, rook g7, block again, rook back to g8. You're getting nowhere here. So we're getting everywhere here. Okay, that king being on g4, we've just forked your king and your rook. How cool is that? So in this position here, we have to play g4 because we want to eventually fork the black king and rook when they are on g4 and what was the other square? G8. Can you imagine seeing that back here? It's like, oh yeah, we can win this by forking the black king and rook when they're on g4 and g8. Right, brilliant study. Next, this one is also from 1925, and I mean, we're only 2 positions in, but I'm hoping you might be starting to become convinced already by like, okay, yeah, I'm spotting the sort of the common theme here. We've got an advanced passed pawn supported by a knight, and that is what's going to win white this. It's not a game, it's a study, but like I say, the composers of this study, you can't just compose a study out of nothing. There's these beautiful sort of knight moves and the way in which, you know, these really clever moves. Think, oh, that's really clever, which is kind of what studies are, isn't it? Sort of these moves that seem to go against the standard things we do in chess, and you think that's really clever. It's like, yeah, it is, but to create that really clever situation, we've got a far advanced passed pawn and a knight nearby supporting it, which is what Dvoretsky writes about. Rooks struggle against knights when we have those elements. Anyway, white's only got 1 winning move here. I've been waffling on for more than enough for you to have ignored me and paused the video. Some of you probably don't bother pausing the video. You think I talk so much rubbish, you can just sort of put me on mute until the pieces start moving. But it is the same idea. Push the d pawn. Okay. Couple of things to investigate here. What if black just starts checking and tries to get their rook to the d file? The problem with getting the rook to the d file here is that, yeah, the white king can just sort of run away and allow the black rook to the d file, but the knight on g8 is well placed to come and defend the d7 pawn. I mean, the rook might think to come back and attack the knight. It hasn't attacked the knight. That knight can't be touched. White king's coming into f5. It's over. Okay, and that's not really like a beautiful, elegant, oh, how clever. That's just a winning position for white. So after this d7 move, this idea of just coming back here and just delivering perpetual check until the white king lets you onto the d file, it doesn't work. So instead we've got rook a8. Now, where to put the knight? One idea we might have is to go knight e7 because we're trying to get it to c8. Okay. The problem with knight e7, it does work against rook d8 straight away. If black plays rook d8 straight away, we can attack that rook and the pawn can't be touched because that forks the king and the rook. But black doesn't put their rook on d8. Black just calmly comes back with their king. And when we block, yeah, great, we've blocked the rook's defense of d8, but now we have got the perpetual because white's knight's not in a place where it can defend the d pawn once the rook's on the d file. The black king's come and taken away the b6 square, which would be the place where white could do that. So we'll just see a perpetual, or if the white king tries to run away, then yeah, the rook can go to the d file. White's got to be careful not to end up in a losing position there, actually. Just interested, actually. Now, king f3 is still a draw, apparently, because the white knight just hops back into the game just. Anyway, not knight e7. Can't do that. Instead, we're going to play knight to h6. Now what? Well, if black tries the same as before, just bring the king up, knight f7, the d pawn's queening, black's dead. Okay. If the rook comes to d8, we see the same trick. We attack the rook, and it can't take the d pawn because knight takes e5 check, forks the king and the rook. Okay. What if black comes back and tries to get on the d file with this perpetual idea? Rook a1 check, rook a2 check, king f3, rook d2. We still defend the d pawn. We defend it indirectly with knight f7, and black's dead. This king and rook fork again being the problem. So what does black do? There's just no way to stop that d pawn. Well, black goes on the offensive and starts setting up checkmate threats of their own. King d3, checkmate is threatened. Let's create some luft. Okay. And it's utterly pointless black coming down and checking because this king's going to zigzag its way out of there, and white's going to have a completely winning position again. But black resets up the checkmate with king e3. Knight f5 check. The advantage of that is that we've got the black king away from it being a checkmate threat, but we've put our knight in sort of a temporarily silly place where it's not well placed to defend this d pawn. King to d3. Now how do we defend the d pawn? Okay, well, we defend it with knight e7. If the rook comes to d8, we've still got the same fork trick, because it didn't matter that the king's moved from c4 to d3, admittedly via e3, it's still getting forked on e5. But we've just moved our knight away from f5, so black's like, all right, I'll come back to e3 with the king. You can come back and check me on f5 if you want. We're going to go around in circles for perpetual. Would you like a draw? White's like, no, I'm going to check you on d5 this time. All right, we'll go around in circles that way. King d3. Then we attack the rook, knight c7. It's utterly pointless, the black rook coming down and checking the white king. There's no way to stop the d pawn behind its own king. And this shift in a minute is easily going to pick up the black rook. So it has to come to d8 now. But then we can attack it, and we're not forking on e5, we're forking on c5. Right, next. This is a study from 1997. It is white to play. This one's very good. One of the things that made this very good for me is that at first you're like, I don't really see how black stops the queening of the pawn. It's just so easy. You know, we can play d7. We could play knight e6, check, and then d7. I just don't really get it. Why is this a study? And then the more you look into it, the more you realise the tricks that black's got to get out of this. So I mean, knight e6 check chucks away the win. The black king comes to e3. We push the d pawn, and then black starts checking. Rook a4 check, king b7, rook b4 check, king c7. I mean, the black rook can just keep checking. If the white king comes forward on the A and the B files and allows one of these two moves, black's fine, and they can just give up their rook for the D pawn. So white's trick here, you'd think, would be to come to the C file and then play king D6 because the C8 square is covered. But this is fine. Black just calmly drops the rook back to C1, and if white promotes, then rook D1 check just picks up whatever's on D8, or white might want to sacrifice a piece and lose the game as well in the meantime. But then white might think, okay, but I've got the D3 square, so what are you doing about that? Well, we can check. Knight D3, king takes E2. And white's got to be careful not to lose that. That looks losing for white, but they can actually just take on E5 with the king and go into a drawn version of rook versus pawn. So it's not simple. Black's got all these checks on the A, the B and the C file, drop the rook back down, and they can stop the D pawn that way. But if we play D7 first, then there's some extra tricks that White's got up his sleeve. That means this is just a win, and it's very, very clever how it works. Rook A4 check, King B7, Rook B4 check. If just King C7, that hasn't chucked away the win, but only because we can repeat by going back. If King C7 has been played with the intention of coming to D6, that has chucked away the win. Rook D4 check, and we can just take the D pawn and come and grab the E pawn with our king. So not King C7. White should play King C6, and that relinquishes control of the B8 square. So the black rook's down to the back rank. We come back and attack it. By the way, sorry, if black then tried rook c4 check, that's obviously very silly, because the king can come back and hit the rook on the b file, and dropping the rook back achieves nothing, because d8 just queens and there is no skewer this time. So rook to b8, and we can come and attack the rook while simultaneously defending the d8 square. Rook to a8, queening straight away is no good, because we're going to lose our e pawn. So we attack the rook again, and it shifts over to the other side. Just like the last one, the rook's running out of squares. But the rook going to the other side, you think, well, that's great, because now we've got this block. Unfortunately, that block's no good, because the rook just pins our d pawn to the king and picks it up next go. So what do? Well, here comes the thunderbolt, the pinnacle of this one. Another just incredible move, look, just like g4 in the last one. e4, bosh. What's so good about that? What does it even achieve? Well, what it achieves is that we're trying to drag the black king to the e4 square. So this time, after the block happens, that forks the king and the rook. Okay, so black can't touch that e pawn straight away. Well, it can't even touch it next move. It definitely can't take it now. What if black just does nothing? Well, there isn't really a way to do nothing. Rook g8 is obviously no good, because then we do block, and then the rook can't pin the pawn, because the knight's covering the g7 square. Rook f8 forks, gets your rook and king forks straight away. So there's just nowhere for black to move the rook, so it has to be a king move. We've seen that taking the pawn's no good, because we can block and then do the fork after rook h7. So what other choices has black got? Well, what about king e3? The problem with king e3 is it's run into this knight f5 check. So knights can do checks to just gain tempi at the vital time. King to c7, and when the black rook comes over to the other side, I mean, if black just does nothing here, by the way, king takes e4 would have the same problem. Okay, that problem hasn't gone away with the knight fork on f6. If black just does nothing with their king and leaves the rook on that side, we'd see a block, rook h7, and then knight d6, and we're defending the pawn. We don't need the knight anymore to queen the d pawn and win the black rook for it, so that's just a win. So black can't do nothing there. Rook over to the other side, rook a8. We go check, there's the e pawn gone, another check, king f3. By the way, if black didn't take it, we'd still play knight d6 anyway, and sort of transpose into the same ideas, where we're going to keep the e pawn and we're just going to end up with a knight and a pawn versus a pawn. But after that check, we've got knight c8 and we've blocked on that side, whilst also covering the a7 square. So king e3 doesn't work. So we've tried king takes e4, we've tried king e3. What if black said, well, I'm just going to step away from the pawn completely? The problem with that is we're going to keep our e-pawn. So knight e8 knight e8 blocks, rook h7, king back to c6. The rook's got to go, and the knight's back in time to defend the e-pawn. So king g5 is no good either. So the main line in this study, with all those different options explored, is king f3, where we're not stepping into a check, but we are maintaining contact with the e-pawn. So, I mean, white's only got one winning move here, and if they played, for example, king c7, The rook goes over to a8. The knight might come into f5, but rook a7 check, and we're going to be picking up the d pawn, and then also taking the e pawn is going to be a draw. So not king c7. White has to here play king c6. That allows the rook to d8, but then, and this is the really cool part, knight e6 attacks the rook. Black's like, yeah, whatever, I'll just take your d pawn, and we've got this intermezzo, knight g5 check. King to f4 or g4, don't think it matters. King takes rook, king takes knight. There's only one winning move still, which is king e6. After all that hard work, if you go king d6 thinking you've got the same thing, the same mind square win, you haven't. King f6, that's the draw. So you've got to shoulder the black king away from coming back, and then after king f4, king d5, and white's won. That's the classic mind square. Probably the first position you ever think of, isn't it, when someone talks about mind squares. Yeah, really enjoyed that one. Push the d pawn, and then after these series of checks, when the rook comes back, keep hassling the rook, hassle it over to the other side, and then this is the bit, isn't it? e4. Wow, it's just such a crazy move, but has a common theme with the last position. We dragged the king to g4 in the last position. This time we drag the king to e4, so that it's kings, the black king's in a dodgy place and gets their king and rook forward. Right, one last one. This is from 1913, this study, and yeah, I've sent this. I really enjoyed this one. I've sent this around to a few WhatsApp groups I'm in. So I know one of the 5 people who end up watching my videos. It probably is just the WhatsApp groups that have already seen this. White to play. Pause the video. What do we do? How do we win this? Now this time, the natural move of c7, or indeed knight d6, which would surely transpose, isn't going to cut it. Okay, c7, we could see rook f8, knight d6. I'm pretty sure that could have just happened in the other order. The problem that white's got here is that black will just push the c pawn, and if white's then stupid enough to queen, in fact white's lost that position anyway apparently, the c pawn's going to run. Okay, so white has actually lost that position. By the way, in the original position, we can just, if we want to draw, we could have just taken on c5. So that's not going to work, and we need something different. And it doesn't take long to find a different idea. In knight g5 check, the black king you'd think would come to g6 to defend the h5 pawn. In terms of where we're going next with all the moves, the g6 and the g8 squares are basically the same. You'll see why in a sec. The g7 square is very silly because c7, the rook can't get back. Knight e6 check is going to fork a king and a rook. So g7's obviously a silly place to put the king. h6 and h8 are the same thing again. Of the two, h6 seems the most sensible. But the problem with this is that after c7, the rook comes back. We've got knight f7 check, deflecting the rook off the defense of c8. So obviously the black rook can't move, but when the king does, knight d8 blocks the rook's defense of c8, and white's just going to win. So in the original position after knight g5 check, black's only got 2 moves that we haven't already seen have lost quite quickly, which are king g8 and king g6. And given they're effectively the same in terms of the trickery that white's got coming up, black may as well play king g6 and defend the h5 pawn. Then white plays knight e6, and it's like, well, that's just it. I mean, this is one of the things about studies that makes them so good, is that you think you've just done it and it's easy, and then it's like, well, what does black do? The f8 square's guarded. How is black stopping the c pawn? And it's like, well, this is how black's stopping the c pawn. Rook a1. You're like, oh, that's annoying, isn't it? Because now, if we push the c pawn, we're going to see rook takes a4 check. The white king moves, and the black rook can come back to a8. And in fact, black's then winning that. After the white king moves and black plays rook a8, it's a win for black, that position. So that was a bit of a mess up, wasn't it? So then we go back to this position and think, well, it's annoying, isn't it, that rook takes a4 arrives with check. So maybe, and then a very clever idea comes to mind, which is knight f4 check. And then you think you've solved it. You think that's absolutely brilliant. What a brilliant study. Knight f4 check. King moves, presumably to f5. And then c7. And then when rook takes a4, you just queen. You just don't care about dropping the knight. Okay. By the way, the fact that I said the g6 square and the g8 square were the same thing in terms of where this puzzle was going means that, oh, hang on, if the king was on g8, this knight f4 check isn't going to be a check. So how's that going to work? Well, you'll be relieved to hear that this isn't the winning line. Because black doesn't take on a4. This is one of my favourite bits of this entire study, is this incredible draw that black's now got, which is king takes f4, king to h3. I mean, black's threatening a checkmate, so the white king has to move. Don't take the h-pawn. Oh my word. That would chuck away the draw then, and black's won. So the king has to come down to get out the checkmate. Black just keeps setting up the checkmate again. We either go back and forth, perpetual, on h3, h4, and f3, f4, or white comes down the board and takes this little perpetual instead. There's no way for the white king to avoid the perpetual check. And that means that back here, knight f4 check doesn't cut it. Like, what do you do? If you push the c-pawn, we're going to see rook takes a4 check, king moves, rook a8. The knight f4 block, check block, sort of preemptive block doesn't work. What do? We do this. What absolutely incredible move. Knight d4. And that knight just can't be taken. If it's taken with the pawn, we queen straight away. If it's taken with the rook, then we just move the king and it queens next go. That knight cannot be taken. Although actually this is black's best line, is to take that knight. I guess the only slightly dissatisfying thing about this study is it's got this sort of not quite clean cut bit to it, in that black could take on d4 and then sort of get their rook to g4 and claim that this is a fortress. It's not a fortress. I haven't got onto queen versus rook yet in my sort of epic project to get through the Dvoretsky Endgame manual. I'll be getting to it sometime in the next couple of months. I think I'm right in saying, though, because I have sort of glanced at it occasionally in the past, that the fortress works if the pawn is back on black's third rank. I might have got this completely wrong, so just ignore me if I have. But I don't think I have, though. Not sure. I think if the pawn's back on black's third rank and defending the rook, then it's a fortress. But crucially, you'd need the white king to be the other side for it to be a fortress. That's the sort of I think this is the reason I remember it. It's kind of counterintuitive, is that you need your king like in the wrong place, like with less freedom, in this case on the H file. Anyway, ignore all that. It's not particularly important. It's just that it's not a fortress here, the queen versus rook, and it is a win. But we're not finished here, are we? Because black's like, very clever, I can't take your knight. But remember, I took on a4 with check, not because I wanted to win your knight, but because after your king moves, I'm going to play rook a8. You've done a clever knight block. Fine, I'm still going to play rook a8. There's nothing clever about that knight block. You've just put your knight in a silly place. I'm still playing rook a8. But as white, we're like, well, no, our knight's not in a silly place. Our knight's an incredible place. Knight to c6. If you now put your rook on c8, we're having it. The end of beautiful study. And that is the sort of the end of the study. That I would call that the main line, because the problem that black's got is if they leave their rook here on a8 to defend c8 from the left, we're coming in to block that next go. And if they move their rook over to like f8, say, to guard c8 from the right, then we're coming into block here. Next go. Black cannot stop the white knight blocking their rook defending the c8 promotion on the next go unless they walk into this fork. I think that's my favourite of the four. That study is 113 years old. 113 years ago, someone came up with that so that we could all enjoy it today. I enjoyed it, I hope you did too. I can't prove that everything we've been through here is going to help anyone in their chess games ever. I think it is, I'm pretty convinced it is. They all had the same theme. We had a far advanced pawn, a knight supporting it, and when that was the case, there was all sorts of tricks that the side with a knight could use, different tricks in each position. Wonderful, brilliant tricks, but tricks. And tricks, tactics only come about when you've got a positional advantage or some sort of strategic advantage already, in this case a far advanced pawn supported by the knight. Right, hope everyone enjoyed that.